On a calm summer afternoon in the small town of Newton, Kansas, a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old sat on high chairs in the kitchen, eating ice cream and laughing together, having no idea their lives were about to be torn apart by something no child should ever have to understand. The front door opened, and their mother gently said, "You girls keep eating. I'll be right back," then walked down the hallway with a tall, thin stranger, dark hair poking out from under a red baseball cap. Just a few minutes later came hurried footsteps, the slam of a closet door, and darkness swallowing the two children, while outside, heavy sounds echoed. Thuds, impacts, the noise of a human life being crushed in the silence of an ordinary day. When they were finally rescued, the only thing they could repeat, over and over, like a haunting curse, was, "The bad man hurt Mommy," and the town of Newton would need more than 2 years and a revolution in forensic science to finally answer one question. Who was the bad man? Welcome to the Case Files, where cold, buried crime stories are pulled back into the light through the lens of forensic science and real cases that are not for the faint of heart. Today, we're leaving behind the noise of big cities and heading to a small town in Kansas, where people once believed that faith in God and trust in your neighbors were enough to keep you safe, until a killer walked through an unlocked front door. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the monster next door, the man behind the aviator shades, the two-world killer of Newton, Kansas, the case of Rhonda Krehbiel and Chester Higginbotham. Part 1. Setting characters. Newton, Kansas is a small town in the heart of America with about 20,000 residents, surrounded by wheat and cornfields and quiet streets where the sound of a car passing by can be enough to make people look up. Here, people grow up together, go to church together, kids play in the yard without constant adult supervision, and most striking of all, many homes aren't even locked, with front doors sometimes left slightly open to let the breeze in. For Newton residents, the idea of a horrific crime is something that happens on TV, somewhere far away, not something that could walk into a pretty family home just a few minutes' drive from the local church. Rhonda Krehbiel was the kind of woman many families would consider ideal. 36 years old, mother of 3 young daughters, a devoted wife, always showing up with a gentle smile and warm eyes at church gatherings. She and her husband married in the early 1980s, building a cozy home where the kids could jump on the bed, play in the yard, and ride bikes around the neighborhood, while Rhonda worked part-time, taught Sunday school, and helped with preschool programs in the community. Her oldest daughter, Natalie, was a bright, lively girl who often invited her best friend from class over to play, a girl the same age who would come by most afternoons to snack, play with toys, and watch movies together. Just 3 blocks away from Rhonda's house lived a man in his early 30s, with a past no one in Newton really understood. Chester Higginbotham, or more accurately, the name he preferred to use, Matthew Murphy. He had been in and out of jail for theft, car theft, burglary, and other minor crimes, growing up in violence, in dark rooms where being locked in a closet or shoved into a corner wasn't a rare punishment, but a regular part of childhood. What made him truly frightening was that he could look people straight in the eye, smile politely, bring his own cup into a gas station to ask for water, make small talk, while his entire identity and life story were built on the stolen name of a dead man. In Wichita, about 30 miles from Newton, Janetta Jody McCown lived a life completely different from Rhonda's, working on the busy Broadway strip, surviving as a sex worker, existing in the shadows that society rarely wants to look at directly. She didn't have the warm family life that Rhonda did, but she had a close friend named Emma, who always tried to make sure they never went with clients alone, always writing down license plates and faces, so that if something bad happened, At least there would be one fragile lead. Between these two seemingly separate worlds, a devout mother and a woman surviving in a stigmatized line of work, there was a hidden link they never knew about. A path leading straight to a man in aviator sunglasses with a fake name. Part 2. First Signs of Trouble. May 20th, 1994 began like any other ordinary day in Newton, with clear blue skies, the sound of children playing outside, and mothers staying home with their kids while their husbands commuted to work in nearby cities. That morning, Rhonda had taken her two oldest daughters, one 8 and one 6, on a field trip to Wichita, a little outing to let them see the world beyond their quiet hometown. Around 2 in the afternoon they returned home, but the 8-year-old went back to school with her class, and the youngest child was at her grandmother's house, leaving only the second daughter, 6-year-old Natalie, at home with Rhonda and a 5-year-old classmate. That afternoon, Rhonda was at home with Natalie and her friend, the two girls sitting on high chairs in the kitchen, eating ice cream, giggling, and sharing the small stories that make up a child's world. A little after 3 o'clock, a knock sounded at the front door, a noise so familiar in Newton, where neighbors often dropped by without calling first, and people rarely felt any need to check the peephole to see who was outside. Rhonda walked to the door, told the girls, "You girls keep eating. I'll be right back." And just a few minutes later, she reappeared in the hallway, this time not alone, but followed by a strange man, tall and thin, dark hair, wearing a red baseball cap, stepping into the house like a guest. Natalie, just 6 years old at the time, still sensed that something was off. Her mother had never taken a stranger straight to the back of the house, into the bedroom area, without an introduction or a single word to her child. That strange feeling flashed by quickly, swallowed by the innocence of childhood. But later, when she looked back, it became the one clear dividing line between total safety and the doorway to hell swinging wide open. A little while later, Natalie stepped out of the kitchen to ask if she could go outside to play, only to see the strange man standing alone in the hallway, his expression hard to read, his eyes unlike any of her parents' friends she had ever met. She asked, "Where's my mom?" But he didn't answer, just stared at her. And then everything happened fast. Both girls were grabbed, dragged into a closet. The door slammed shut. Darkness rushed in, and there was no time to understand what was happening. In the dark, the two children heard harsh sounds, heavy thuds, something hitting the floor, groans, then silence, all magnified by fear and the feeling of being trapped, like a twisted echo of the very childhood trauma the killer himself may once have endured. Outside that closet, the world went on as usual. Cars drove by, people shopped, and no one knew that inside an unlocked home, a mother was fighting for her life in her final seconds, just a few steps away from the children she loved. Part 3. The turning point. The crime scene. When Natalie's friend's mother, the woman who had asked Rhonda to watch her daughter that afternoon, arrived at the front door to pick her up, everything looked normal at first, except for one detail. No one came to the door, even though Rhonda's car was still there, and the front door, as usual, was unlocked. She knocked, called Rhonda's name, peered through the window, and waited. But there was no movement, no footsteps, no children's laughter, only a heavy silence hanging over a home that was usually full of life. That uneasy feeling started to grow, and when she tried calling the house phone and no one answered, she decided to contact Rhonda's husband, who was at work in Wichita, about 30 miles away from Newton. He immediately called family members and asked them to go check the house, because he knew his wife would never just leave in the middle of the afternoon without telling anyone, and she would never abandon their 3 young daughters at home. When Rhonda's relatives arrived, they saw her purse still sitting neatly inside, along with her keys, wallet, and all her personal items exactly where they should be, as if she had only stepped out of the room for a quick task. Then they heard crying, faint voices from upstairs, and as they rushed up, the closet door swung open to reveal two terrified little girls, faces streaked with tears, almost unable to put into words what they had just lived through. The only sentence that burst out, almost like instinct, was, "The bad man hurt Mommy," a simple phrase that instantly turned every vague worry and half-formed fear into a full-blown nightmare. Newton police were called in, and Police Chief T. Walton was one of the first officers to step into the bedroom where the crime had taken place, completely unprepared for the image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On the bed in the master bedroom lay Rhonda Krehbiel, motionless, her clothing from the waist down removed, her hands and feet tightly bound with nylon pantyhose, her mouth covered with light-colored tape, dark blood soaking her hair and the bedding. A white sock was wrapped around her neck like a ligature, one eye swollen, her face bearing the clear marks of a brutal beating. And it didn't take long for officers to realize this was not a simple burglary, but a targeted, sadistic attack far beyond what the peaceful town was used to. The room wasn't ransacked, only a few drawers were open, and there was no sign that the killer had brought weapons or restraints from outside. Everything he needed to control and torture the victim had been taken from inside the home: pantyhose, tape, and any hard object within reach. Under the bed, a small detail almost missed at first glance turned out to be the most valuable item in the entire scene: a pair of aviator-style sunglasses, dropped and lost in the darkness, clearly not belonging to anyone in the victim's family. Out on the lawn beneath a nearby window, several cigarette butts lay scattered in the grass, despite the fact that no one in the household smoked, and there were no ashtrays around to suggest it was a regular habit for any family member. Together, these clues began forming a cold picture. Someone had been watching the house from outside, smoking, waiting for the right moment, then walking through an unlocked door to turn a calm afternoon into a crime scene, right in the middle of a crowded residential neighborhood. Part 4. Investigation. Evidence. In the days immediately following the murder, Newton police faced enormous pressure. A mother killed inside her own home, 2 child witnesses who survived, and a community that had once believed in absolute safety, now drowning in fear. They started with the people closest to the victim, including the family members who had entered the house first and heard the phrase, "The bad man hurt Mommy," because in many cases, the killer is a relative, someone close, or the first person to discover the scene. Investigators dissected every detail in each statement: who arrived when, who touched what, who reacted how, trying to spot any inconsistency, any hidden motive, any crack in the facade that might point to a buried secret. But at least part of the investigative team, especially Chief Walton, felt that the answer wasn't inside the family, because from the beginning, the small child witness had insisted it was a stranger, not a familiar face from church or community gatherings. The biggest problem at that time was technology. In 1994, DNA testing was nowhere near as accessible or sensitive as it is today, especially with extremely difficult samples, like glass already treated with chemicals, or fibrous surfaces like cigarettes, fabric, and pantyhose. Police tried superglue fuming, a technique that uses cyanoacrylate vapors to reveal latent fingerprints on smooth surfaces like glass, but the aviator sunglasses came back with no usable prints at all. The pantyhose, tape, white sock, and bindings provided almost no identifiable trace because their textured surfaces made it incredibly difficult to pull any clear fingerprints or DNA with the methods available at the time. Rhonda's body showed signs of an interrupted sexual assault, multiple bruises, and evidence of a violent struggle. But there was no clear semen sample to extract DNA from, making it even harder to tie one specific suspect definitively to the crime. Meanwhile, the two girls were still very young, their memories soaked in fear, so interviews had to be handled with extreme care, avoiding further trauma while also making sure that no leading questions warped or contaminated their recollections. A small turning point came from a unique figure, Lois Gibson, a renowned forensic sketch artist who had helped identify hundreds of criminals using composite drawings based on witness memory, and who happened to be in Kansas at the time. After reading about the unsolved murder of a young mother in Newton, Lois reached out to the police, offering her help for free, because she knew that in cases like this, if a clear face of the suspect could be put in front of the public, it might completely shift the investigation. She met Natalie, the 6-year-old who had directly seen the strange man walking into the back of the house with her mother, and used a catalog of eyes, noses, mouths, and face shapes for the child to choose from, building a composite sketch, piece by piece. Natalie clearly remembered the dark hair down to the ears, the red baseball cap, the gaunt face, and especially the blue eyes, a detail adults might overlook, but that had burned itself into the child's memory. When the sketch was finished, Natalie burst into tears, recognizing the face on the page as the man who had taken her mother away forever. While for police, it was the first time they had a concrete image to show the public. Posters were printed, sent to law enforcement agencies, run in newspapers and on TV, generating numerous tips. But one by one, those leads hit dead ends, as if the killer had vanished from town immediately after leaving Rhonda's house. For more than a year, the Rhonda Krehbiel case teetered on the edge of becoming a cold case, a sad story mentioned over dinner without an ending, while her family and 3 daughters had to learn to live with an emptiness that nothing could fill. Part 5. The Reveal. Truth Emerges. In September 1995, in Wichita, a larger city about 30 miles from Newton, another missing person case surfaced, this time not from a peaceful home, but from the shadowy world of sex work on Broadway Street. Jonetta Jody McCown, a woman in her 30s working as a sex worker, vanished after leaving with a client, a man who had offered to pay more than usual for an overnight stay, triggering a sense of unease in her friend, Emma. Emma noted the license plate, writing down the number as a survival habit, then waited for her friend to return. But when Jody still hadn't shown up the next day, fear turned into panic and pushed her to go to the police. The license plate led Wichita police to a name, Chester Higginbotham, living in Newton, with a criminal record, prior prison time, and a reputation in the files as a chronic lawbreaker, though not necessarily tied to this level of violence, at least not on paper. When officers showed up at Chester's house, he wasn't there, only his wife, but shortly afterward, he drove up, saw the police, told his wife to stay in the car, and appeared cooperative, offering to speak with investigators directly. While one team brought Chester to the station for questioning, another searched his house and the nearby storage shed, the place he used to store items and work on cars, looking for any signs that Jody had ever been there, or, worse, had died there. His wife recounted a recent night when she went to the shed and saw her husband there with a younger woman lying sideways in the car, motionless, which terrified her so much she retreated home and prayed, too afraid to call the police, not wanting to admit the worst. Inside the shed, police didn't find a body, but they did find rope, tape, and nylon zip ties, all items painfully familiar to anyone who had seen the crime scene photos from Rhonda Krehbiel's bedroom in Newton over a year earlier. Days later, the decomposed body of a woman was found along a roadside not far from Wichita, her mouth taped, arms and legs bound, with posture, materials used, and signs of violence strikingly similar to what Newton officers had documented in Rhonda's case. So it was Jonetta Jody McCown, and for Chief Walton, the moment he saw Jody's crime scene photos side by side with Rhonda's felt like fitting together the last 2 pieces of a puzzle, revealing the same killer's signature. The next question was, who exactly was Chester Higginbotham, and why did he look so much like the composite drawing made from a little girl's memory in Newton more than a year earlier? The only difference being that his hair was now cut shorter. Digging deeper, investigators learned that the Matthew Murphy name he used wasn't an innocent nickname, but the full identity of a man who had died in a bicycle accident in Arizona in the late 1980s. Shortly after that death, a driver's license was issued under the name Matthew Sean Murphy, this time bearing Chester's face, allowing him to apply for jobs, sign paperwork, and even get married under a name that wasn't his, deceiving both his wife and the entire community. His wife, the woman who had believed she was married to a normal man, later discovered that her entire marriage rested on a lie so fundamental that she had to petition the court to declare the union invalid once the truth came out. Meanwhile, the biggest remaining issue was direct evidence. How could they prove Chester not only killed Jody, but was also the man who walked into Rhonda's house, tied her to the bed, and left the aviator sunglasses under the bed that day? Fortunately, or perhaps thanks to scientific progress, a small window of opportunity opened. New DNA testing methods could now extract genetic material from surfaces that had previously been treated with chemicals, like glass exposed to superglue fuming. Police sent the aviator sunglasses, believed to belong to the killer, to the lab, along with Chester's blood sample, then waited for months in tension, knowing that if the results matched, the final door of justice could finally slam shut behind him. When the report came back, confirming that the DNA on the sunglasses matched Chester Higginbotham's sample, it wasn't just a technical finding. It was the long-awaited answer to 2 years of fear, suspicion, and grief for an entire town and 2 families. Part 6. Trial. Sentencing. The murder of Jonetta Jody McCown went to trial first, built on evidence from the shed, the rope, tape, zip ties, the wife's testimony about the night she saw an unmoving girl in the car, and the way Jody's body had been bound and gagged. Prosecutors argued this was no accident, no argument gone wrong, but a deliberate act with a clear pattern, a signature crime, and that Jody was only one of 2 women who paid the ultimate price. In 1996, Chester was sentenced to 40 years in prison for Jody's murder, a heavy punishment, but still not addressing the name that haunted Newton the most. Rhonda Krehbiel, the mother killed in her own home in front of her children. While he was already behind bars for Jody's case, prosecutors and investigators prepared the Rhonda file again, this time armed with a new weapon. The DNA results from the aviator sunglasses found under the bed at the 1994 crime scene. At the 1999 trial, Chester's ex-wife took the stand, testifying that he regularly wore aviator-style sunglasses identical to the ones recovered, and that neither she nor their housemates owned such a pair or had any reason to be inside Rhonda's home. Combined with the composite sketch by Lois Gibson based on Natalie's memory, the child's description of a tall, thin man with dark hair, a red cap, and the fact that Chester had lived only 3 blocks from Rhonda's house at the time, a full picture began to form. Prosecutors added a potential motive. About a week before the murder, Rhonda had attended a Christian women's club meeting where she had a heated argument with Chester, embarrassing him in front of others, something a narcissistic, woman-hating man might brood over. The 1999 trial ended with the jury finding Chester Higginbotham guilty of murdering Rhonda Krehbiel, and the court imposing a hard 40 sentence, 40 years without the possibility of parole, added on top of his prior sentence. In practical terms, that meant Chester would die behind bars in a Kansas prison, specifically at Lansing Correctional Facility, with no chance of ever walking free again on the same streets he once roamed while scouting his victims. Even though the verdicts brought a sense of justice being served, people like Natalie, Rhonda's children, Jody's family, and the ex-wife who once lived with a killer without knowing his real name, all still have to live with scars that will never fully heal. For Natalie, now an adult, the memory of that afternoon never fades. The image of the strange man in the hallway, the slam of the closet door, the darkness swallowing her and her friend, and then the heavy silence that signaled her mother was gone. For Rhonda's 3 daughters, they grew up with a void that can never be filled, with questions about the woman their mother might have become, the moments they should have shared, and the pain of knowing that the man who stole all of that once lived just 3 blocks away. For Emma, Jody's friend, writing down that license plate number helped police catch the killer, but it can't erase the guilt of not being able to save her best friend from that final night. And for the wife who lived with Chester under the name Matthew Murphy, discovering that her entire marriage was a lie, that the man she loved had never truly existed under the name she called, and that she had slept beside a murderer for so many nights. All of that is a kind of trauma no therapy can fully erase. She has to live with the haunting question: were there signs she missed, moments when she could have known, chances to stop what happened? But the truth is that Chester Higginbotham, or whatever name he chose to use, was a master of deception, a man who spent his life hiding his true nature, living under a dead man's identity, and moving through the world with a mask so perfect that even those closest to him couldn't see the monster beneath. He chose victims from 2 completely different worlds: a devoted mother in a Christian community and a sex worker on the streets of Wichita, showing that to him no one was safe, no world was out of reach, and no social boundary could protect against the rage of a calculated killer. Psychologists later analyzed that Chester's violent past, being locked in closets as a child and growing up in an abusive environment, may have helped shape his brutal behavior, but it doesn't excuse or justify what he did to Rhonda and Jody. The reality is that countless people grow up in horrific conditions without ever becoming killers, and Chester chose his path step by step, victim by victim, with cold calculation and no mercy. Locking 2 children in a closet, echoing the very trauma he may have experienced, shows a level of cruelty that goes far beyond survival or self-defense. It was a deliberate act, meant to cause pain and terror. In the years after his conviction, Chester never showed real remorse, never fully explained his motives, and never gave the kind of closure the victims' families desperately wanted. He remains behind bars at Lansing Correctional Facility, a name now synonymous with the deepest kind of betrayal: the neighbor who turned out to be a killer, the smiling man who turned out to be a monster, the fake identity hiding a bloody past. And every day he wakes up in prison, 2 families somewhere out there are still living with the consequences of what he did. Children now grown but still carrying the memory of that fateful afternoon. And a community still trying to understand how someone like him could live among them for so long without being exposed. Conclusion and message. The case of Rhonda Krehbiel and Jonetta Jody. McCown is the story of 2 women from completely different worlds. One a mother, living in the warmth of family. The other, a woman surviving in society's shadows, who ultimately shared the same fate at the hands of a single killer. It shows that evil doesn't always come with a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a restaurant uniform, hides behind aviator sunglasses, smiles politely, and is known by the name of a dead man, while its true past and nature remain buried. This is also a story about the power of forensic science. A forgotten pair of sunglasses that once yielded no fingerprints eventually became the DNA key that locked a man in a prison cell who might otherwise have slipped away from justice forever. But behind all the technical terms are real human beings. Children growing up with the memory of being locked in a closet while their mother was murdered in the next room. A friend living with the fact that she wrote down a license plate, but still couldn't save Jody. A wife forced to accept that the man she loved never truly existed under the name she called. If this story makes you think, remember that evil can sometimes be much closer than we want to believe, and that uneasy feeling, that gut instinct, is never meaningless. Trust it. Speak up when you see something off, even if it's just a strange car lingering too long outside someone's house. This case also raises important questions about how we build and protect our communities. The town of Newton believed completely in its own safety, left doors unlocked, trusted that neighbors were good people. But Chester Higginbotham proved that sometimes the monster doesn't come from outside. It's already living among us, under a fake name and a friendly smile. That doesn't mean we should live in fear or suspect everyone, but it does mean we need to pay attention to warning signs, trust our instincts, and never ignore strange behavior just because we want to believe the best in people. For Rhonda, the argument at the Christian Women's Club meeting may have been a warning sign no one thought to follow up on. For Jody, going with a client who paid more than usual in an already dangerous line of work put her directly in the sights of a predator waiting for an opportunity. Forensic science played a decisive role in this case. Without advances in DNA technology, the aviator sunglasses would have remained a useless clue, and Chester might never have been convicted of killing Rhonda. This reminds us how important it is to preserve crime scenes, keep evidence, even when current technology can't analyze it yet, and invest in forensic research so that cold cases can be solved as new methods emerge. For the victims' families, waiting more than 2 years for answers was a constant, grinding pain. But when those answers finally came, they brought a kind of closure nothing else could. The certainty that the right man is behind bars, and that justice, though delayed, was done. Thank you for staying with this case until the end. And if you want to keep exploring cold files and stories where science, instinct, and human error collide, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and leave your thoughts down below. Because every share not only helps a story be told, but also keeps the names of victims like Rhonda Krehbiel and Jonetta Jody McCown from fading into oblivion, while their killer remains locked away for life behind prison walls. And maybe that's the only way those who are gone can continue to exist, not in fear, but in the memories and lessons they leave behind for the living. This is not just the story of 2 murders. It is the story of 2 communities shaken to their core, of children learning how to live with trauma, of a wife forced to rebuild her entire understanding of reality, and of a justice system pushed to evolve its technology to keep up with the sophistication of modern crime. Chester Higginbotham may have lived under a fake name and hidden behind a pair of aviator shades, but in the end, it was that very pair of glasses, the item he thought had been overlooked, that became the evidence that convicted him, proving that in the age of forensic science, even the smallest details can speak the truth a killer tries to bury. Remember the names: Rhonda Krehbiel, the mother of 3 who spent her final afternoon with her daughter, never knowing that opening the front door would be the last decision she ever made. And Jonetta Jody McCown, the woman living in circumstances society often turns its back on, whose life was worth just as much as anyone else's, and whose friend fought to make sure she wouldn't be forgotten. Their story is a reminder that evil does not discriminate, that justice may be slow but can still arrive, and that even in the deepest darkness, science and human persistence can bring light.